Hello and welcome to part 2 of this Selmer Little Giant amplifier. So if you remember, in part 1 we changed some plate resistors in this amp and gave it a check over, and then we gave it a demo and it sounded dreadful and had got all sorts of problems. We was trying to keep this amp original as possible, but that kind of has failed in this case. And this amp, we need to do something with it. As I said in part 1, the guy wants to use this for recording. He wants to use this amp regularly. He's no intentions of selling it. He just wants it to work. He's owned it since he was very young and he wants to use it. So we are going to alter this circuit and try and get it to sound better. And I know there'll be some people out there, it should be left original, whatever else. But this, it's the customer's amp and it's the customer's request. So we're going to sort this amp out. Now I've been looking at this amp. I've got it up on the scope at the minute, but I've been looking at this circuit and how we can improve it. And I've come up with a few ideas. And the main idea I've got with this amp is that I don't think it'd be too difficult to convert this into a Fender Champ, which, let's face it, is the pinnacle of single-ended amplifiers. Some would argue the best sounding amp ever made, and I wouldn't want to put up a strong argument against that. I'm also, one of the reasons why I've got this on the scope, I'm trying to find out what we're actually getting out of this amp before it begins to overdrive, and it's a very nasty overdrive as well that we was getting out of this amp. We're also going to put an inline jack socket on this amp, so this amp can be used on another speaker, on a just different cab. I'm going to remove all these carbon comp resistors, all of them. I do have a feeling that the grid leak, and it is something one of the viewers of the channel mentioned, and I had got kind of suspicions, and he's vastly more experienced than I am, so when he kind of came up with the same thing, that was one of the things. So I'm wondering if the grid leak resistor on that first stage is gone, and all these resistors are high in value, so I'm just going to change them all. Another problem we found on this amp was that the volume control, when you turn it down, doesn't shut down completely. The whole wiring of that volume and that tone control is dreadful. It's just, so that's something else we're going to look at as well. And as I said, really we could wire this up as a Fender Champ with a tone stack, and I forget which one that is, out of the 5F2? I can't remember. I'll have to have a look. We're going to pull the schematic up for that anyway. So that's the first thing, is we are going to lose all these resistors. And to be fair, if we're converting this to a Champ, we'll probably lose a fair few of them anyway. Now the first stage is grid biased on this, and it has no cathode resistor. That means means the cathode goes straight to ground on the first stage. But it's not difficult to convert this, and if we actually look, if we move across and see how low I can get, because I say this, as we know, this camera's not great at focusing close in, but if we look here, let's just use a pencil, sorry, because that's a lot, it's switched on. If you look here, we've got a jumper in there that is from the cathode to ground, so all I've got to do is put a resistor in there. That 2.2 will change to a 1.5. We put 1.5s in both of them. The first stage will just, and we can solder that on underneath. We can put a 25 microfarad capacitor on there, which is again what we've got on a Champ. We can change the plate resistors to 100k. We can change the coupling caps, no problem. The drop-in resistors and things will probably leave the same values, but we can just change those. And again, it is on the schematic, and again, the same viewer of the schematic Gooden pointed out that there is a lack of smoothing on this preamp stage. We've only got two 32 microfarad caps here, so you know the preamp stage is poorly smoothed. So we could improve that there. Again, if we're doing this as a champ, we could improve that. The cathode bypass capacitor is in that can there, but that's no problem because we remove this can, put some new caps in. We can put that again, we can solder that on the bottom of the board. There's the resistor there for the cathode. Probably won't even have to change that, maybe, depending on what the bias is. We can check the bias. And then the only other thing, if we convert this to a champ, we'll need some negative feedback on this. But that shouldn't be too difficult to put together, because the negative feedback comes from the cathode on the second stage of the 12AX7. Can't remember exactly what resistors are in there. 56K springs to mind, but I could be wrong. But we'll see on the schematic, and then we'll bring that up to there, rewire the tone stack properly, and I think this will be a banging amplifier if we do that. So not too difficult to turn this into a Fender champ. Right, so you can see that I've got the scope up there, and you can see we've got a signal going on. Now both controls are down at that, they're both at 0. If I turn up the volume, and you can see, so that at that point volume is probably a quarter of the way up, maybe. You can see that we've got virtually no signal there, and then as we go up again, you can see it goes back. So we've got signal there turned down to 0, and we've got signal there. If we put a measure on there, if you look at peak to peak, and peak to peak is there, 12.2, 12.4, it's bouncing around that. We turn that down, you can see there's barely any volume there, and then it goes back up again when I turn it to 0. So I don't know what's going on with that, but that's a very strange set out. Now the amp's turned up flat out. If I turn the volume down to nothing, then the tone control does nothing, but we've still got signal, which is, well, the tone control, we'd expect it to be doing nothing if it was turned down to 0. If we turn the amp up, and if I turn that to where it's virtually, when we turn up the tone control, you see we get, and we also get almost instant clipping there. Can't get, so there you can see even that's looking a bit ragged. And that's with the, so again, if we put that to about the lowest point, so that's where we're almost at 0 volume. Turn it the treble, the tone, and that's just taking it off the stop. See, that's, so that's also issues there. Now let's turn the amp up a bit. The minute we apply that tone, we get problems. Now if that is now flat out with the tone, so that's full treble. So if we bring the volume down now, and we can just about get a clean wave there. Just go on to measure. So if you remember, you needed the tone full up on this amp to get any sort of top on the signal, and you can see that's beginning to clip there. So if I drop, and so now with the volume set at its cleanest point, if we move the tone, that's bass, that's treble, tone down, tone up, it doesn't make that much difference on the actual gain. So the maximum we're getting out of this amp is about 11.2 volts. 11.2 divided by 2, so 5.6 times 0.707, and we need to square that, and we divide it by 4 because this is only a 4 ohms impedance. We're getting 3.9 watts out of this clean, which is probably, volume wise, is probably about right given the, you know, the plate voltage we've got. So you can see now it's turned up flat out, but we've got obviously it's just, you can see by the wave that we're clipping, we're into distortion, but obviously it's not a pleasant sound. So let's just, so we would like there to add some negative feedback on that and try and clean it up a bit and get more out of this amp cleaner. Big difference. So if we could just snack a bit more out of this, and obviously just we'd have a nicer, cleaner tone, I think, with negative feedback on. Yeah, you see you can't really, now the volume's on the stop, so we've got signal. So if I turn it up now, because the tone's flat out, so this tone control's interacting with the volume, and I just about get that off the stop and it begins to distort. So we've got all sorts of problems with that tone circuit. It's junk basically. There seems to be some, you know, some power there in this amp. It's whether we can utilize it and get it to sound good. What we're going to do, we're going to try and convert this into a Fender Champ, and I don't think it'll be too difficult to do it, to be honest. So we've done a fair bit of work on this amp now, and this is quite easy to do, to convert these. It's no big deal really. So there's our grid stopper. Now what they've done on this, they've used pin 7 as the first stage, and pin 6 coming out, and pin 8 as the cathode. As the first stage, it's just back to front. I always, if I wire amps up, I always wire them up from pin 2 onwards, but it doesn't really make any difference, and I do see a lot of amps like this. It's quite common. So we're going into pin 7 with our grid stopper. We've got our grid leak resistor there of 1 meg to ground. We've got two 1.5k cathode resistors for each stage. Remember, there was a jumper over that one there. Just coming a bit closer. You know, there was a jumper, so we've just removed the jumper. So we're coming out of pin 6 through this capacitor here, this 22 nanofarad, which we've now got in, and that goes to this wire here. You can see this blue and blue and white wire. That's coming down onto the to the pot there, and then it's going out on this yellow wire to the wiper. Don't worry about the tone control for a bit, we'll do that later. So we're coming out this yellow wire. That yellow wire comes out and goes down to here, there. So we're coming out of pin 1 now, there, and we're coming through that capacitor there, and we've reached that 10k resistor there. That is our grid stopper for the grid on this EL84 6BQ5. Now on the Fender Champ schematic there is no grid stopper, but we're going to leave that in. In fact, we're going to change it. Some of these carbon comp resistors, as I were taking them out, they just crumbled into bits. Here's one for example, and you can see that was the cathode resistor on that first stage, so that's junk. That's where we've got to now in our circuit. We've got to there. We need to attach the tone control, but we can do that off the Champ schematic. We're working us way through. Now once we've got to this grid here, there. Now the other thing is, this is our grid leak resistor for the output tube, and it is 1 meg on here, but on this champ it's 220k. Yes, 220k. So we're going to change that to 220k. We're going to just change that, put a new one in. Now this is the drop-in resistor to this preamp tube here. This has no smoothing on it. It's using the smoothing from the screen, I'm guessing, on there. I'll check on that schematic. This is a Little Giant Mark III, by the way, not a Mark II or a Mark I. Did 3 versions of this circuit. The earlier versions, that was 10 meg, which it should have been 10 meg really. Someone pointed that out on the channel, but they'd obviously looked at the Mark I schematic, which it was 10 meg. You're going to wire this grid biased, you really need that at 10 meg. So we've got our grid stopper in there, which is going to the output tube, pin 2, and we remove that 1 meg grid leak to the output tube, and I've actually put 240k in because I didn't have a 220 in these. So I'm using metal films for this amp, and the reason is because it's being used for recording. We need to make this amp as quiet as we can make it. And I know some people will be going, oh, you shouldn't put them in, but the guy wants this for recording. He wants to use it regularly, so it needs to be as quiet as it can be. And these are being used in boutique amps more and more now anyway, so I'm using them. So we've got 240 in there. It's a little bit over, but it's near enough. So now we're going to look at this tone stack, which is just the tone control really. So we've got this blue and white wire. This is coming out of the first stage from the plate. It's smoothed, sorry, it's decoupled with that capacitor there. Comes down to the volume. This orange wire goes off to the center tap of the tone control, and that's correct as for the Fender Champ. This wire, this capacitor here, this 10 nanofarad, and you can't see him because he's tucked in there, you can see him there. He's going from the end, from one end of the tone control, and he's going down to ground. On the Champ, that's 5 nanofarad, and that's wired correctly. What's missing off this tone control, and I'm guessing that's probably why when you turn it down we had that buzzing and it was causing all sorts of problems. There's no capacitor on the other side of there. So what we need to do is put a capacitor from here down to center tap here on the volume, and that will complete this tone circuit, and it's as simple as that. I just need to add one capacitor in, except we've got 10 on there instead of 5, so I'm going to change that. And this capacitor that goes from here on this new, and you can see this lug's never been used on there, so from this end lug here, this capacitor will go down to the center tap on the volume there, and that is what's missing off this tone circuit. So the other end pin on the tone controller, as I say, is going to that 10 nanofarad there. Now on the schematic, our missing capacitor is 0.005, so we need to find one of those and take it across to there. On the Champ, as I said, 5 nanofarad. Now I've got some 5 nanofarad capacitors. If you watched the video for when we scoped out the Class AB on the Westminster, part 2 of the Westminster, we looked at some vintage carbon comps and some vintage capacitors that were found in the box when I bought the resistors, and they are 1% tolerance 5 nanofarads. If you remember, we measured those, they're exact. I'm going to go and find one of those now. We can have a look at them. We've got that capacitor on there now, and 500 picofarad, 0.005. I've decided to leave this 10 nanofarad on here. We'll just see how we go with that, which is a bit of a swine to change that, and I might just leave it because that might be okay. It should be okay. Now, just a couple of things when you're doing this, adding this capacitor, if you're going to work on one of these, make sure that these two wires here are AC for the pilot light, make sure you get it underneath those and well away from them, which is what I've done there. Obviously the capacitor's not long enough to reach, so I've had to J-hook it, shrink tube it. And the other thing is, when you're wiring onto this lug on this pot, it hasn't been used for 60 years. If it's blank, if it's unused on yours, it is on this one. So you need to just get a very fine file and clean off the patina. 60 years of patina on there. When you do that, make sure you block this, put some tape or something around there, which is what I did, because otherwise you're filing all that off, it's falling inside the pot, even though it's only very fine. You know, you don't want that inside the pot, so put a bit of tape on there just to stop it going in. And I just drop the nozzle of the hoover over it and just suck the tape up and everything with it. So that's we've kept that away from this AC. So where are we now with this amp? Well, we've wired up the volume control, assuming it all works, of course, when we plug it in. We've wired up the volume and tone controls. We've wired up all these resistors that we've done here, both these stages, and we've got our grid leak in for our output tube and our 10k grid stopper for the output tube. Technically now this amp should fire up and work, but we've still got a few things we need to do. One is our negative feedback, and that's quite simple to add and also very necessary. I have to say, in the past I've not been a fan of negative feedback, but this amp needs it on without question, and we're going to add that. And it's not difficult to add on here, as I said. So all we need is a 22k resistor. I think I said I thought it might be 56, speculating again, was miles out. It's 22k, and all we do, we bring that 22k from this wire here on this is the speaker leads, a bit thin, but here that's the speaker lead going to ground. So we need to come off of this speaker lead here with a 22k resistor, and we're just going to wire that on to the second stage cathode resistor there, and we're good to go. And that's our negative feedback. Simple as that. What we don't have on yet is our bypass cap on the first stage, which is him there. We 25 microfarad. I've not got that on yet either, but that's no big shake to just tack this, because that'll be soldered on the bottom of the board. We don't want to be doing it on here. We should be doing it underneath. And those two things are all that's left now, and this amp will fire up, and technically now is the same champ circuit. This isn't obviously not going to sound as good as a Fender champ, because the transformers are not up to the same mark, but it should still sound okay. Another thing I'm looking at is this capacitor here going across the primaries on the output transformer. So we're just going to have a bit of a look at him as well. He is 4.7 nanofarad on there, so we need to look at him. Now the other thing we don't have on this amplifier is a screen resistor on the output tube, which is pin 9, and this amp must have one on. I'm a big fan of screen resistors, and all output tubes should have them on really. So we've got to find a way of doing that. But really, once we get to that stage, we're getting into the power supply part, which is the next thing we're going to do on this. So I'm going to fit the bypass cap, and I'm going to fit the negative feedback, and then I'm going to fire this amp up. I'm going to check that that volume control, that blue wire is going to ground properly, because remember we had that problem with the volume before. So I'm going to check that as well. And we're going to fire this amp up, and we're going to take some voltage measurements, and then we're going to decide what we're going to do with this power, with the power stage of this amp, the caps. the drop-in resistors, so on. Now we've got a 5.6k resistor, which you can't see. You might be able to see him. He's hiding down there, and he is the drop-in resistor between the plate supply of the output tube and the screen supply of the output tube. And then the only other resistor is this 100k drop-in resistor to this preamp tube, which I think is way too high. On the Champ, that's 22k. So I think we're going to change that to 22k, but we need to try and get some smoothing on this preamp tube as well. But for the time being, I'm going to fit the cap and the negative feedback, and then we're going to plug this in and have a look, see where we are. Right, I've got it fired up. And we've got some signal. I've not done anything on the power stage yet. So we've got a really nice tone now, lovely and bright. But there's still a couple of issues. One is this volume control does not shut off, and I'm beginning to think, I've checked and it is grounded, so I'm beginning to think that there's something wrong with that pot, and that's not good, because replacing that pot is not going to be easy, because it's got the switch on it, the on-off switch. But if I unplug the, let's just unplug the guitar. It's flat out now. Look how quiet that is. You can still hear the capacitor humming a bit, but the amp is actually flat out now. So all that noise that we had before, a lot of it's now gone. But there is still an issue. Look what happens with the tone control. And it's left us with some oscillation when it's on the bass side of the stop. As soon as you lift it off the stop, it goes. So is that capacitor, that 10 nanofarad capacitor, shot? I don't know. Don't know on that one. That oscillation that we've got there, the negative feedback has removed some of that, but obviously something's not quite right. So that negative feedback has made a massive difference on this amp. beautiful shimmer. I mean, this speaker's not fantastic, this ELAC speaker, and with a good speaker in there, you know. So that's the amp flat out now. That's the noise we've got, which you'd expect that from a single-ended amp. Very quiet. That's sounding pretty good. Despite all the problems we've got, that's sounding pretty good. But we have still got some issues. Still got a little bit of interference when we're turning the volume down on the guitar. I'm not sure why that would be yet. And again, I am wondering if there's something not right with that pot. So we've still got a bit of work to do on this, but we are getting there now. So we need some smoothing on that preamp stage, really. And I know it's very quiet, but it does. And that dropping resistor is 100k. Use the pencil because it's switched on. There, the dropping resistor. We're going to change that. Just unplug the guitar before I start messing around with that, because I've got my hands round the strings. So yeah, so this 100k resistor here, we're going to drop that to a 22. Now I've done some voltage readings on here, and if I stick that in there, you can see it. So the 5.6k resistor, remember I said we had, just squeeze into the end of it. It's a bit really hard to get to, that thing. It's a right awkward place. On AC, that's why we're not getting anything. We're on AC. That's just my phone, you can hear interfering with it. So you see 277 volts we've got there. We track that, and we've got 241 there on the other side of that 5.6k. So that's going down to the screen. No screen resistor, we need one. Then that then goes there, and you can see that 241's there. We go to that 100k, we've got 134 the other side of it. Now if we go to the other side of the plate resistor, we've got a paltry 85 volts there. So if we increase that voltage, we might get a shade more headroom. So I'm going to swap that for a 22. Given that this circuit now, you know, is totally different, that preamp circuit's totally different to what it was before, that's what I'm going to aim for. So I'm going to swap that next. Then we're going to have a look at that, and we're going to look at seeing about getting some smoothing on that preamp stage. This should have, you know, it should have smoothing on the, it's sharing the smoothing off the screen, and I really don't want that. I need separate smoothing on each section. So that's the next thing. So look, but we're looking good. Sound wise, it's getting there. It's sounding pretty darn good. We've got an issue with that volume not shutting down, and I've got a feeling, you see that track could be cracked in that pot, and we've got an issue with that tone control still. It's now causing oscillation on the when the volume's at a certain level. So they're the first three things we're going to try and address: the volume, the tone, and we're going to alter that resistor. Right, I've got it up on the scope, and I've not changed that resistor yet, so we're just having a bit of a look. And you can see there, so we've got this bass control down now, and if we start to bring up the volume, and you can see there's issues there with that straight away. And there. So you see as that tone control begins to come down. Getting some ugly goings off there. Now when the volume is flat out on the stop, that's with the bass down, and you can see now that's working correctly. There, you take that out, that cleans up quite nicely. As soon as I begin to take that volume down, we get that. So we've got some issues. Now I don't know whether that's because that volume pot is damaged as well, but I've got a feeling it could be something to do with that. That's the tone full up, that's the tone full down, that's the volume full up with the tone down, that's the tone full up with the volume full up. So tone down with volume full up, tone up with volume full up. That all seems to work correctly. It's as soon as that volume comes off the stop that problems begin to arise. The volume works. And I'll show you what we've done to it in a minute. Well, you can probably see already. Listen now, that second string, how clean and punchy it is. So what have I done to get that volume control to work? Well, I haven't actually set out to fix it. I've kind of fixed it. Just take that socket out of there. I've actually fixed it by smoothing out this preamp stage, these two preamp stages. So I had it on the scope after I put this smoothing cap in there, and we were getting much more clean headroom just by increasing that voltage on those preamp tubes and smoothing it. So we've got a 33 microfarad at 350 volts. Now how I fitted that in there, there's a ground point here on this, which is grounded to this chassis, but also on this tube socket, but also goes to ground underneath. So I've just J-hooked around it, folded it together, soldered it, and then I've soldered the live through one of the holes for the, which was a 100k resistor, which is now 20k. I found a 20k one, so I put that in. I didn't have a 22 in metal films, but it should have been metal oxide really, but actually I need to check that. It's not getting hot. I need to do some maths on that just to make sure that it should be okay. So all I've done is mounted this resistor on the board like this. So I've gone through one of the holes, and then what I did, the live from the capacitor, I've just J-hooked to the leg, soldered the leg in there, wrapped it round the resistor and J-hooked it all there in there, and soldered it in, and that is solid. And so is the cap. An absolute winner. That just fitted in there, just fitted. And to be honest, if you look at that, it looks like it's always been there. So that has completely transformed that preamp stage now. The volume now works, probably now because it's got its own power node, its own capacitor and everything. I don't know, but I don't 100% know why that works, and I'm not really going to delve in to find out why. I'm just pleased that it does. The volume does work now, but again, it just goes to show that not having that extra stage of smoothing there and starving that voltage like they've done, this amp's never been right, not even from the factory. How they even got away with selling these like that, I don't know. But I suppose they were just small practice amps, and what else was there around at that time? Maybe that's why they got away with it. They certainly wouldn't nowadays, would they? This amp is awesome now. It's just sounding awesome, and we're still not completely finished with it yet. So we've still got a problem with this tone control. So I'm just going to plug it back in now. And we've still got that little bit of hum from this capacitor here. Remember, we had a paltry 85 volts on this preamp stage here. Let's have a look at how much we've got now. The meter is here. We're on DC, and now we've got 209, nearly 210 volts there. 209.8. A bit of something there as well. I'm not sure what that is yet. I've got to track that down as well. Something not quite right there. I think it's that too. So we need to just track that down. But that's nothing major. But the only problem left now is this tone control is still not right. So I'm still suspecting that capacitor there. I need to just check the wiring on it again, just go through it again. We've got one carbon comp resistor left, which is the one that's the 5.6k that's hiding down the back of there. We need to put a screen resistor on this tube, and I need to lose this capacitor because we don't know how efficient it's working. And as soon as we've done all this work now, we might as well just get rid of that, and then this will be like a brand new amp. So that's where we are with this project now. Right, we're almost there with this amp now. There's just that tone control problem to sort out. Recapped it, and we've got I'll have to show you how I've done this when we've got it switched off, but basically we've moved the cathode bypass capacitor on the output tube underneath, and obviously it was in the can, but nowadays caps are quite small. So we've got a 22 microfarad Vichy on the bottom there. We've got two Vichy 47 nanofarads at 350. This capacity, you know, was running right on its limit, because when I checked the bias on this, I'd got 263 plate to cathode. So you had another, it was 6.5 volts, 63. So there were about 270 volts on that, so it was about on its limit at 275, and obviously more when it would be switched on normally. But of course this has got an EZ80 there. Sorry, it's got an EZ80 for so it's slow start. You don't just get the voltage. But if this was solid state rectification, those caps wouldn't have been. They'd have been no good for this amp. This amp obviously hasn't been used a lot, which is probably why this cap's working okay. But if this is going to get regularly used, I don't think I'd have wanted to have left that cap in there at 60 years old and running at its limit. So now with 350 volts working in there, we've got a bit extra. So I'll just turn it down. You can't hear anything. It's virtually silent. It is actually, you can hear the fridge over that that's in the background. So we've still got that issue on the tone control, but let's have a listen. This amp sounds gorgeous now, and recapping it has just made even more of a difference. Got it in single coil. So we've got bags of top on it. So before it was all on, you needed all of the tone in to get any decent highs on it. Now loads. That's the tone fully down, which is a bit woolly. Maybe that cap is a bit too big, that 10 nanofarad. But that's with it just turned up a bit, and it does increase the gain as well. Imagine what this thing's going to sound like on a cab. So let's try it in humbucker. Still not happy with that tone control. Neck pickup in single coil. So before I recap this amp, before we change the big electrolytic, when we were playing the thirds and fifths, you got that kind of overtone distortion on there. Now they're just as clear as a bell. sound awesome now. It just sounds amazing. Even like two-handed tapping with a clean tone, it's just you get a big fat full note. That's awesome. That sounds absolutely amazing. I must admit, I didn't expect it to sound that good, but that is awesome. So let's see if we can track down this tone control problem now. And I've got a bit of an idea in thinking about this, and I am wondering if it's where it's grounded, because it's grounded onto the main power cord ground, and really it needs to be on a preamp ground. This capacitor here is grounded over this end where the you know, where the preamp is, and they may have to get to a point with this where we might have to just split the ground on the trace. You know, you do often have to cut them. I mean, there's no hum or anything, but if you listen, you can hear that oscillation. That's down to the tone. So when I turn, and his tone really does affect the gain, the volume on this amp, but it works absolutely fine with the tone full up. As soon as that tone comes off, you're already beginning to hear it. As soon as this tone comes off the stop, it'll go a little bit, and then you've got that oscillation there, which is what was showing up on the scope, and you can hear that now. That's quite. And Pink's obviously not in earshot, otherwise she'd be meowing. So yeah, so that is that's something we've got to look at. Right, I've tacked in a 5 nanofarad cap, one of those red ones that we found in that new old stock resistor haul that I bought, which are those with the tolerance of 1%, and it is exactly 5 nanofarad, that capacitor. I've grounded it over here. However, we've still got the issue, but I've actually found out what it is. It's this wire here that I've put across the tone. Although it was doing it before, I've added this in, and it, so we've got a problem with that wire causing all sorts of noise and things. So it's interfering with these wires. Not sure where what's causing that. I mean, we've probably got a bit more noise on now because I've got this grounded here as well, but I think what I'm going to do with that, you know, I might just put some screen cable in there if I can find somewhere to ground one end of it. Well, of course I can ground it on the pot, can't I? Duh, on the volume. I might change that bias resistor to 180 ohms instead of 150, because this transformer is getting a bit warm. The mains voltage is now up at 242 volts. When we were working on this afternoon, it was about 233.4. So that bias is increasing all the time on there. So I'm reckoning that's up to about 12 watts now. It wasn't far off. What did we have before? Remember that 10 volts on the mains usually makes a watts difference. 11.75. So I'm reckoning now we've gone above 12 watts. so I might just up that to 180. We'll have to see. I'll have to think, but it is getting quite warm, this transformer. So, you know, if we could drop that down a little bit. Thing is, this amp's really loud, so we will lose a bit of volume, but there's so much in it, even at a clean tone. Yes, I think that might be a plan. In fact, I suppose we could try a few resistors in it and just see, and but we'll do that on the scope, I think. Yeah, we'll do that on the scope and just see what how much it changes it. Because to be fair, if it doesn't change it very much on the scope, we could probably go up to maybe 200 ohms in there, or even 220, and that would keep this transformer pretty cool. The last thing we want is that blowing. Right, we've added the screen resistor, and that's really the only way to do it. We've took that up to there, that point of that resistor there, it's being fed. Screen comes down along here, feeds that resistor there, and then carries on to pin 9. So we sucked off the solder. It's quite a big hole to put that in, actually, so we've got that in the hole. We've scraped a little bit off the track there to pin it so it's solid, and then we've fastened it in there. We've cut through the trace, because obviously you have to put that in, and that's 1.5k, and that is much better, and the tube will have a longer life. The amp will just be more stable, full stop. Now, the other thing that I've had to do on a lot of this, and I'm still going around doing it, is the flux that's been left on it. And you can see around these this output, you see where I've scraped no end of it off. There's absolutely stacks of it. So, and there's some of my own I've got to get off as well, and you can see these factory just left on there. Got this screen cable, and what I've done is I've brought it up and over there rather than having it right down inside close to those tubes and running across those AC feeds to that pilot light. And I've sorted it, grounded it at one end, so that's with the tone down, all the way down. No squealing. It works perfectly, and it sounds gorgeous. And it works properly now. We've removed that 10 nanofarad cap and put the 5 in. That's with the tone fully down. Just edge a little bit in. Put it on single coil. Put a bit more in. A bit more. That's awesome. So that works absolutely perfectly, that does now. Obviously, if you wind it up, but just using it at home, no overtone there. Just changing that big electrolytics has just made a massive difference to the sound. I have increased those to 47s, by the way, to get rid of that background noise. Obviously he's using this to record, so the last thing that you need is that background hum, and there is a tiny bit of it but you can barely hear it. Got that lovely shimmer. And those 5 nanofarad capacitors that we got in those, amongst those resistors, obviously using it on this tone stack, there's no voltage going through it. It's already been decoupled, so they're fine. Just I wouldn't want to use them to decouple DC, but on a tone control they're fine. It sounds really sweet. That just sounds awesome. What a tone that's coming out of that. Whoops. Yep, that sounds amazing. So what's left to do on this amp now? Well, I've tacked that on, and there's no shrink tubing around where the screen's been cut, so we need to cover that and solder it on properly. Screen resistor's done. Everything's done now on this amp, except I'm looking at changing that bias resistor, and it is quite late now. It is just coming up to midnight. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unsolder that resistor, that 150 ohms cathode resistor, get this all set up on the scope ready for tomorrow. Got the scope on and got the amp running, so let's just have a look at where we are with things. So remember, so we've got that turned up. Remember when we used this tone control, we had all that horrendous interference and problems there. Now that's the tone, that's down and that's up, so that's working fine now. The amp's flat out, tone down, tone up, everything works fine. That's good. We now got the volume now cuts off completely, which it didn't before. That was down to that node not being, that third node. We didn't have a third node really, so as soon as we've added that capacitor and created that third node, that smoothing capacitor, which was 33 microfarad, which we put on the preamp stage, that volume's worked perfectly ever since. So what we're doing here now is we're going to look at biasing this amp a bit cooler, as I said. At the moment I've got the 150 ohm resistor tapped in on a couple of jumpers. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop the bias slightly, and we're going to look at what impact that has on the actual amp. So we're also going to look at what maximum power we're going to get out of this amp. So we're also going to look at see how much power we're going to lose as we drop the bias, clean tone that is. Not, you know, we're looking to keep this amp as clean as we can, but obviously it will. So where it actually peaks, and as you can see, it's just beginning to go there. So it's going on the bottom a bit there as well, squaring off. So if we look at that, that's probably about where we want to be. So we're just going to measure. So you can see there we're peaking at 9 volts on there. Now this amp will go a lot louder, of course, but it'll be overdriven. What's going on there? just realised I put the current limiter on when I first switched it on, so we've got that off now. Now let's see what. I wondered why I just looked down at the power and it said 224 volts. The current limiter does tend to knock off a bit of mains voltage, or my current limiter does anyway. But I think we're about the same. I don't think that made any difference. 9.2 now we're peaking at, so a little bit more, but not a deal. So that's what we've got clean. With a 150R resistor, we've got 2.6 watts, which doesn't sound a lot, but with a very efficient speaker on there and everything, that's a fair amount for a little single-ended amp. Remember, the maximum you should be able to get out of one of these is about 4 watts. So the amp is now flat out. Let's have a look what we've got. So now we've got 12.8 up there, even peaking at 13 there. Look, just for a second. So we've got some serious. In fact, that's strange because, yeah, if I turn down the tone, it's peaking at 13 volts there. If I got the tone full up, let's say we had it halfway, somewhere there. So again, 12.8. So that is kicking out a fair bit of wattage now for a little amp. 1 by 2 equals 0.7. Let's square it and divide it by 4. So that's kicking out 5.1 there. Right, so what we're going to do now, better turn it back down. There we go. What we're going to do now, I'm going to change the resistor. So I've got some resistors here, some 5 watters, and we have, I'm going to put 200 ohms in it now. So I'm just going to unhook this one. You'll see the scope go off. And now it's back on there. So we've got 200 ohms now. So let's just see where we are with that. So let's turn the amp up a bit more, see if we can get right. Let's go to measure. 9.6 now. That's still clean. Yep, 9.6. So let's go with that. 2.8. So we seem to be getting as much out of it, if not, and that's more, like that. So about the same. So we've not lost anything there, have we, with that at 200R? But we have gained something, because we're now not drawing as much current on that transformer. And again, as the voltage increases on the mains as it gets later into the day, we should end up with, last night we'd got 242, almost 243. We've now got 233 at the moment. So let's crank it. Same as we did before, about halfway on the tone. Let's go into measure. Whoops. Peak to peak is 12.4 now, just clipping 12.4 on there. 12.4. Now it's kicking out 4.8. So we've lost some top end on there, but we haven't lost any clean tone volume. We've just lost power. 5.1, 4.8. So we've not, you know, that's not a problem, is it? Really, this amp will be used in a studio a lot. The volume's not the issue, it's the clean volume that's the issue there, and we haven't lost any. In fact, it could be argued that we've gained a little bit there. So biasing this amp now at 200 with a 200 ohm resistor, is absolutely fine. So now the other thing is, what will the bias be? So what we need to do now is I need to just do a quick test to see what the bias is. So the tube's now drawing 40 milliamps. It was drawing 42 with the 150 ohms that was standard in the amp. So now it's biased at 9.9. So when the voltage gets up to 242-ish, 243, it'll probably be biased at the watt on top of that, so pushing 11. So that's not bad. We've that's now took some strain off that transformer. So let's just try another one. Right, I've now got a 330 ohm resistor in this amp. So let's just remove that. Right, let's go. That's about the max we can get out of it now. Clean. Let's have a look where we are. 8.8. Now that has significantly reduced. So now we're getting 2.4 out of it clean. But still not dropped a massive amount. Remember, we had 2.8. So we have lost some clean volume now. We'd lost, with the 200 ohm one, we hadn't lost any. So let's see what we get now when it flat out. Still about the same look, 12 volts there. We've lost a tiny bit. So between the 200 ohm and the 330 ohm resistor, we've virtually lost no top end now, but we've lost a bit more clean. But the clip, the amp flat out, we've lost a little bit, but not a massive amount. Not worth doing the maths on. 0.2 of a volt, and we've lost 0.4 of a watt on the clean tone. So let's check the bias now on this 330 ohm resistor, and let's just see what the bias says. 8.25 watts. So the tube's drawing 30 milliamps and 8.25 watts there. So that's a massive jump from 200 to 330. So this amp now, that's slightly less than 70%. The amp's now drawing 150 milliamps off the mains. Before it was drawing 170 milliamps. So you can see what we've done here. This amp is now running much cooler. This transformer's still fairly warm, but we have been hammering this amp, and we've had different resistors on, so we won't know how cool this transformer gets. Now the other thing, when this amp is cranked up flat out, the bias on the tube will increase. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to measure it again with this resistor in there, and this time we're going to see what it is when it's cranked up. The other thing to bear in mind, with the old resistors in there, with the old capacitors, the old electrolytic, and I'm not sure where he's gone now, the one the can we took out, this one, is only rated at 275 volts. Plate to cathode, I've already got 275 volts. Now I've changed this resistor. Remember that plate to ground is more than plate to cathode. There's another 10 volts on that, so there would be 285 volts sitting this. Look what it's rated at, 275. That's only that's rated at. So that cap was I'm surprised that cap has even lasted that as long as it has, and probably only cost this amp was biased so hot. But so that's another thing to bear in mind when you're working on amps and you decide to change the bias, lower the bias to keep it cool. That's all well and good, but just make sure remember, as you lower that bias the bias current, you're increasing the voltage on the plate. So you need to make sure that it doesn't then start to exceed the capacitor, which in this case would have done. If we'd still got this capacitor in now, if we'd still got him in now, we'd have to, to run this amp cool, he would have to go. he wouldn't have enough working volts. But we've got rid of him anyway because he's old. And now it's 9 watts there, 9.1 watts. So we've now got, this amp's cranked up flat out, but we've now got less current draw on it than when it was idling before, by putting that resistor in there. So some interesting figures there. So in actual fact, when this amp is idling now with this 330 ohm resistor in, that we would have had to have got rid of that cap, but as we've got rid of it anyway, when it's turned flat out, then the plate voltage has dropped to 230. So I've now got the 150 ohm resistor back in there now, and it's flat out. Now we've got 52.9 milliamps, so 53 milliamps drawing on this transformer now when it's flat out. So when it's turned up flat out, that's 53 milliamps we've got going there. So that's another 10 milliamps of current draw with the 153 than we've got with the 330. And that tube's now 12.17 watts. So that would be absolutely fine if this had got a beefy old transformer on there. Would be absolutely fine. But the question remains though there is that how much volume gain do we get from that? So there we are thrashing 7 bells of poo out of this transformer with the 150 ohm resistor in there. We've got 12, we peak to peak, we've got 12.6, it's just peaking. So if we put the 330 back in, we're now drawing 10 milliamps less than 13 milliamps less actually, because it was 40 milliamps before. And now we're drawing 13 milliamps less, and we've lost 0.4 of a volt. So it's not even worth doing, in fact 0.2 of a volt, it's not even worth doing the maths on, is it? So there's no, in other words, on this particular amplifier, the way it's laid out, and with this transformer in, there is no mileage in biasing this any higher, really. Right, I've got the guitar plugged into it. That's single coil. You can see the amp's just beginning to clip there now. So just beginning to clip. So now let's swap it back for its original resistor. See what we get. 150 again. Maybe a tiny bit cleaner with the 150 at that volume. Volume didn't increase or decrease there, but that's minimal. Now that may be, again, you know, that's on this amp. That may be different on other amplifiers. Bigger, more powerful transformers that will, you know, will stand a lot more current. Different tubes, different setup on this amp with these tubes in, with these transformers, blah blah, whatever, no difference. No difference at all. Or if it is, it's minimal. Tiny amount. Right, got it on the 4x12. Thought we'll give it a blast. That sounds awesome. That's the full treble. That's the tone all the way down. Just turn it up a bit more. neck pickup on single coil. That sounds awesome. What a tool. So there we go. So we've tried it on the 4x12. Obviously this is G1275s. I've got a couple of 1x12s, 1912 cabs. One of them has got the stock 150 watt speaker in Celestion. The other one's got a Eminence Patriot, one of the Neo Magnet ones. So let's give it a try on one of those. Right, I've got the 1x12. This is the Eminence one, the Eminence Patriot. So it's one of those Neo Magnet ones. Back in single coil mode. sounds really nice on that speaker, really nice. So that's full treble now, full tone. This speaker's a little bit brighter than the G12. Some of my rusty playing, and the arthritis is playing up in my thumbs, so it does restrict me playing now and again. So there we go, Selmer Little Giant, which is now the 5F2-A Princeton, and I've really enjoyed doing this. It's been great fun getting this amp, you know, just going through it and gradually changing it. And what a tool. That just sounds amazing. Now, I mean, obviously it sounds better on these speakers, but even on its own speaker, it sounds awesome. An absolute tool that is now. And to, you know, in the recording studio, he's going to love that. Gets it on a little cab like this, and you've got a real tasty amp there. So let me know what you think in the comments. Yeah, that'll do it for this one. It's been a long one, but I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed watching it as well. So thanks for watching. You all take care, and I'll see you all in another video. Bye bye for now.